Hey, how's it going, everyone? Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to cover the shared responsibility model for cloud security, and I'll go into one of our specific products called AWS Security Hub. So, and I hope to answer that question as we kind of talk through the shared responsibility model. So here's a quick agenda. We'll talk shared responsibility model first. We'll do an overview of our general security services. Let's talk about where Security Hub falls into that. Dive a little bit deeper into the Security Hub and some of its use cases, compliance and reporting capabilities, and then that'll wrap us up. So as you mentioned, before I cover the slide, the question about the difference between security in the cloud and in your data centers. They're very similar. The major component is in the data centers. There's typically distinct lines of separation where you have owners of platforms like your servers, your VMs, your database that are not like the end user. Where in the cloud, depending on if you're using like a managed database service or deploying your own databases and managing those, that responsibility can move to a different area. And we'll dive into that here. So in the AWS cloud, AWS, and this is if you're familiar with AWS cloud, this is a slide you'll see over and over again, where AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud and our customers are responsible for security in the cloud. And what does that mean? It varies by the services that you use in the cloud. So for the cloud, the data center component of the cloud, the backend networking, the global architecture, the hardware, those components are always going to be the responsibility of AWS and our cloud. But as you move into, say, our services, where say if you're using like a basic VM, that operating system for that VM, the networking configuration behind it is all the customer's responsibility, and the data protection as far as encryption or anything like that. But where that line starts to blur a little bit is if you're using our managed service. So if you're using our managed database service where you're only bringing your data and we're managed in database platform, the responsibility for the operating system and the platform comes back to AWS because we're managing that platform for you. Hopefully that adds some clarity. Just want to, and you've seen these terms before in the other presentations. Identity, protect, detect, response, and cover. You've kind of heard that throughout all these presentations so far. We have services, native services in AWS to cover each of these categories because at AWS, we believe that security is priority number 0. It's the most important thing. And as you notice that out of all the services that we have, AWS Security Hub is both in the identity and in the tech space. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward of why it exists there. But if there's any area here, services that you want to learn more about, feel free to drop a question in the chat or reach out to me for a follow-up call, and I'll be happy to cover any of the topics that we have here. So let's start with a problem statement. Why is cloud security important, or security in general important, and why having the right tools are important? Oftentimes, every company has some compliance regulations that they have to adhere to. And there are so many checks that you have to do. I heard one of the other speakers say that security is normally first and compliance secondary, right? There's so many checks that you have to go through to meet compliance. There's just not enough time to manually validate, or if you don't have the right tools, that you're in compliance with your regulatory. There's also, with the different tools that you bring in, there can be different formats that the tool presents results in, and you don't have a unified way to centralize that feedback. The other one is you simply have too many alerts, and without automation, you have a lot of alerts. And see this with a lot of customers. They have all the tools turned on and enabled, but they don't have the resolution part in place. So they have a bunch of alerts, have all the scores and the pretty presentation, and they just have low scores because there's no automation taking place to keep up with the changing pace in their environments to actually make the changes they need to keep their environment secure. And then the last one here is just the integration across multiple accounts. Best practice that we have at AWS is you have accounts, cloud accounts based on your workloads, not just one big shared account. And with that, you need visibility, especially from a security lens, across all those accounts to simplify the view and to make sure all your accounts are properly protected. So we'll dive into Security Hub. So what is AWS Security Hub? It is a compliance and really a SIM-like tool. So there are compliance packs that we'll talk more about that you can apply compliance packs that align with your industry. And you can also aggregate all your findings from other tools into Security Hub and send them to either an on-prem SIM or to any kind of automation that you have in place. So it serves two functions. We'll dive into it more. So it also gives you a centralized dashboard, so where you can centralize a view of all your AWS accounts into one view for security admins, and they can actually cut tickets or work with the team of the account owners to make sure that the findings are being rectified. You have a view of compliance posture that you can see with the score, and then you also have the ability to create automated triggers based on events. So here's an example of how Security Hub works. And this is an example of our tools. You see that there's third-party integration here as well. We'll dive more into this in the next slide. But you have findings from, say, our config or inspector or Macie looking for like personal data, or our firewall manager tool. So all these tools can send aggregated reports with findings into Security Hub. So you have one tool to look at and one location to go view all your findings in your cloud environments. And then you can check those findings against your compliance reports and all in one tool, and then also take action once you have matured to the point where you are automating your response. We'll dive into that a little bit deeper. So here, you start to see, and this slide is a little bit dated. The next two slides are where all of our relevant partners aren't there. I'll find an updated slide and get it out to Ron. But here you see there's multiple facets you can do with Security Hub. You can correlate all your findings to one location based on our services or third party. You can check those results for compliance findings. You can send those results to our security lake. You can also send them to EventBridge, which is basically allowing you to take action on those findings. And here are the automation steps we did, either our Lambda or step functions to automate response, or to a third party tool for ticketing that you might have on-prem that you use for your other SIM related activities. I'll briefly discuss this slide. This is just, like I said, I'll give you an updated slide here. This is just showing that we have a lot of third-party integration with your existing tools that you probably use on-prem. You can still use those tools in the cloud and also integrate those to Security Hub and send them back to your SIM tools on cloud or take action. Let's dive into compliance and reporting. So some of the most popular compliance checks that we see is CIS benchmarks, PCI for like your credit cards. And then we have at AWS, we have established our own benchmark based on the best practices that we have established from just running cloud, not only in our retail business, but with all our customers. And we put in some pre-built checks, right, of compliance that you should have. And you can deploy these compliance packs at your leisure to within Security Hub to assess your findings and basically give you a compliance score that you can send to your auditors or view those results in real time, or create a report and have your compliance taken care of for you. So here's a couple of examples of, and I heard this mentioned before, and some of like the CIS benchmarks that we have. There's over 45 pre-configured rules that we have, and some are like not having root account accessible, so that anybody can go in and just have root access, having certain ports on security blocks, so you don't allow anybody to ingress information out to any port, and then removing any full access, right? So make sure you have least privilege access enabled in your environments. So those are some pre-checks for the CIS benchmark. Example of our AWS foundational best practices. Some of these overlap, but blocking public access to S3, that's one of the most popular breaches that you see as customers have object storage exposed publicly, not knowing it, and giving out customer data, right? So with this benchmark, it would alert you that somebody's opened up an S3 publicly and it's being exposed. And the last one for PCI, it's more around making sure you're healthily protecting your data and that you have validation of who's accessing the data because it's PI data, and just making sure and making sure that the access is secure with using HTTPS instead of like HTTP, for example. And that's a pretty quick presentation. There are some links at the end of this. I'll open up for questions if there are any.